some old familiar faces. So welcome everyone. Um, so of course, today I really have to talk about the situation in Korea and with True Mother. There's really nothing else I feel like I could talk about. It really is kind of, I guess, a critical, I don't guess, actually, it is a very critical moment in our movement's history. So, um, yeah, so I just wanted to share some thoughts and reflections. I do think I've been very kind of grateful for the kind of, I guess, attitude or the kind of messaging coming out from Korea. I feel like it's been very kind of humble, very principled, right? Um, and even Mother herself has very much been consistent, right, in the standard of the principle, right? That as a parent, please don't worry about me, right? And then as a child, the same when True Father was in prison, it's his prayer to God is don't worry about me, right? Like it's I don't want to cause anguish and suffering to other people. Like I'll be okay. I know who I am. I'm it doesn't phase me, right? Whatever happens, I'm still God's daughter, I'm still God's son, right? So it is, but it is hard not to feel very kind of indignant and feel like it's a sense of kind of righteousness or a little bit of anger, right? Because it's so unfair. It's so clearly an attack, right? Not just an attack on Mother, but really an attack on all of us, right? As people of faith. And again, for those that don't know, it's not just happening to Mother or our church, but it's happening to other churches in Korea, right? It's kind of a concerted effort, a kind of cultural shift right now in the Korean kind of government and people. And one thing I think it really highlights is there's the primary thing we have to really guard and be aware of is the culture that people believe in and react to and are part of. Because you can have, religious freedom, you can have the laws in place, you can have the kind of protections promised, but at the end of the day, it's really the people themselves that decide how they're going to implement those laws, how they're going to follow them, how they're going to honor them, right? And that's really a reflection of the culture of the people. Um, Even in America, right, we have such a strong First Amendment, such a strong religious freedom, and yet they still put Father in prison in Denver, right? So it's, I think there's a lot of important lessons that we can take away at this time, and we have to be very aware of what's going on. But I think the core doesn't change. The core of the principle, the core of who we are, the core of what we believe, and the core purpose of the providence doesn't change, right? And I think that's why, Mother's message is very consistent, right? That what matters isn't in this moment. What matters is the principle, it's the culture of our movement. It's doing God's will and being children of God. So I wanted to actually start by sharing a story that I think it has some parallels, which is the story of the Mormon Church and the founder of the Mormon Church. It's kind of an interesting, fascinating parallel. Um, and for those that don't know, the founder of the Mormon Church was Joseph Smith. It was founded in America. It grew very, very quickly. And it was very, very controversial. And essentially, the Mormons kept getting kicked out of every state and they kept going west, right? And at one point, they were in a state called Missouri. And essentially, it became a little bit like a civil war, right? They were getting attacked, they were defending themselves. And then at one point, after one of these little skirmishes, um, a mob of like 50, 60 people went to like one of their communities. They were just living kind of in tents and they were kind of settled. There were a bunch of families in the area and just shot up the whole place. It was kind of a massacre. And uh, and so then were kicked out of the state and moved to the next state over. And the next state over, they made their own city. So Joseph Smith was the mayor of a city. And then some ex-members came and started printing all this negative stuff to, some of it was probably true, but they were just printing this kind of criticism of the church and the church leadership and the theology. And so he shut down the press because he was the mayor of the city. And then that caused a kind of riot reaction from people in surrounding areas. And so the governor of the state convinced him that if he came in to prison, the state would protect him, that he would be protected in prison and he would get a free trial, right? Completely side note, he was also running for president, Joseph Smith. So it's just interesting. He was a very kind of dynamic character in this way. So he went to the prison with his brother. And then again, a mob of people came, broke into the prison and killed him and his brother. And that was kind of the life of the early Mormon church and the start of Joseph Smith. And it's just another kind of, when I read it, it's so strange because it's so different than the world we live in. Joseph Smith in prison shot back at the people attacking him. He had his own gun and he was like shooting the attackers, and then he jumped out a window to try to escape. So it was a completely different world. And the reason I mention this is because I think we often take for granted how lucky we are to be able to practice our religion, to have this freedom of religion and this protection on kind of a national level. Because this story of Joseph Smith that I just shared was only 200 years, it was less than 200 years ago. This happened in 1838. So less than 200 years ago, if you were a religious minority that was very controversial, you could have 50 armed people come and try to kill you, right? That was kind of the world people were living, right? It's almost crazy to imagine that, right? But it can give you a little bit of insight then also on Christian history. Christian history was really founded on martyrdom, right? And what made Christian history so successful, and it's an interesting contrast to what the Mormons were doing. Eventually, they just kept moving west until they could establish their own state. They just kept moving until they were far enough away from everyone that they were kind of completely protected by their own numbers, right? And then now, in America, essentially the state of Utah is a Mormon state. And then the 3 states around Utah are about 70 to 80% Mormon, right? And so they're protected in that way, right? They have their own culture, they have their own community. I dropped by, I know I've told this story before, but on STF, I was traveling by bus and I had like a 5-hour layover in Salt Lake City. It's like a different country. Everyone's dressed nice. There's no bars allowed to be open, right? It's like almost serene walking around, right? Because it's just a completely different culture. They built their own state, really. So again, you can kind of imagine also Christian history was this history of martyrdom, this history of trying to practice their faith in secret, always hiding, always being, always being at odds with the entire culture around them, trying to build something. And if they got caught, if they got discovered, if anyone betrayed them or decided to turn them in, then it meant they just had to face death, not just imprisonment, but usually death, right? So I mention all this because it really is the foundation that we stand on, right? In the principle, it talks about the merit of the age, which is something I really believe in and I'm really grateful for. It's always kind of top of my mind in terms of we live in such a blessed time because we're at the kind of end of this painful history, right? Of martyrdom, of kind of constant war, of roving gangs killing you because they're angry at you, right? That period is ending, right? And I really believe it's ending, even though it still exists in many parts of the world. And if you think about even our own church history, Father kind of grew up in this environment where he was almost killed. Went to prison 6 times, but 5 of those times was under communism and Japanese occupation. Once he was left for dead, tortured and beaten and thrown out in the snow. And another time he was um, in Hungnam, where the survival rate was very, very low. So, um, and then even in America, even in a country that supposedly had all these protections, right? We know what happened when the church started in America. All these rumors spread. People were being kidnapped, right, and forced to change their faith. And then when they imprisoned Father, uh, you know, it was very similar. Everything that's happening now with Mother just keeps reminding me of this time, and what I've read about Father's imprisonment. And ever since then, they always add this. They can always add, the media always adds, oh, Sun Myung Moon, a convicted felon, right? It's like it never went away because this happened. Then for the rest of Father's life, every time any article was written about the church, anytime there was any press, they always wrote Sun Myung Moon, a convicted felon, right? And that's something that is like a shame. It's like embarrassing for the history of America, right? It's kind of a mark against this idea that there is religious freedom, that there is that the culture can embrace God's will, right? And I remember I watched this short video clip of Mother, and again, I know I mentioned this before, but it just stuck with me so deeply. His mother, when Father was taken to Danbury, Mother was crying, and she said, I I wish this day, this is my best translation of it. I only heard it in Korean. She only said a few words, as she always does. And she said, I wish this day was erased from history. Those were her words, right? And I always interpret it as kind of like she's saying, because she's so hurt, she feels so indignant, that she feels like it's so unrighteous, like her husband is trying to do God's will and getting attacked by the government. So I always interpreted those words to be like her personal kind of reaction or anger, right? But now that Mother's kind of going through the same thing, and I think I mentioned in my email that it's the Chuseok holiday. So there's like a week where they kind of close everything down. So people can't visit her on like the equivalent of Christmas or Thanksgiving holiday. She's just completely alone for a week. Hopefully, obviously the staff hopefully are checking up on her. But there's a real possibility that she doesn't survive this week, right? There's always a possibility that Mother could pass at any moment and move to spirit world, but especially in the exact circumstances, it's not a small probability. It's probably at least 50%. Um, Again, I'm not her doctor. I don't know her health situation, but that's something like is a reality with her age, with the circumstances, with her access to healthcare, with just the physical stress of, sleeping in this kind of small, like one bed space on the floor. So if that happens, even already, it's like an embarrassment for the Korean government, the Korean people who elected the government. It's like a stain on their history, right? Um, and the media as well, and the way they kind of play their part in kind of ginning up the hysteria or the kind of cultural opinion, right? And so I kind of realized, looking back at what Mother was saying about what happened to Father, part of that, of course, her own like frustration, anger was there, but part of that is that's how I feel. I wish this day gets erased from history. I feel like I don't want this black stain on on people, right? On the Korean people, the Korean government. Like this is almost embarrassing for, you know, the people that have done this to mom, right? It's it's a kind of a historical mistake, right? What's very interesting is I've started teaching Zach the principle, just kind of talking through the stories, and he really wants to hear more. And sometimes I'm not ready to give the next lecture, but he really wants DP lectures. And so we're talking about kind of the historical figures. Yesterday, I was telling him about kind of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Trying to explain how each one is playing their part in God's providence, right? And how one mistake creates such a impact. Like Abraham's, even in the car today, we're just driving, and he was obviously thinking about, and he's like, I can't believe not cutting the dove meant he had to then sacrifice his son. It's so extreme, right? And I'm like, yes, because that's the impact of a small mistake when it has all that historical context, all that preparation before it, right? So it's it really is it's something that will be stuck in history for a long time. The fact that at the end of her life, mother was attacked and prosecuted. So in one sense, it's part of me feels like it's just I get very angry and I get very upset at the politics of it, the government of it, right? It's embarrassing almost for them to make such a mistake. And that's kind of the negative side of it, right? It's kind of the anger, it's the frustration, it's the injustice. But on the flip side, it's you know, Shinchonim has been saying some things that have really kind of moved me around. He really wants to forgive everyone. He really wants to have that right heart, right? Where even though people make mistakes, God wants us to love everyone. God wants us to always forgive, right? That the only way we can move forward, the only way we can succeed is if we don't compromise the principle and the value of the principle. That no matter what happens, right? That we are always the people who represent true parents. We're always the people who follow the principle, right? And so that like it's natural to be angry, but it would be wrong for us to act on our anger, right? To become angry people or to uh, create a mob and attack the detention centers, whatever crazy ideas that have happened in the past, the way people react to them. And one thing I think a lot about now is going back to one of the things that always strikes me as very fascinating about the Mormons is the way they kind of moved and created their own state, right? Their own community and culture. I remember a father once saying, and this was in the 90s, early 2000s, he said very clearly, and this quote, I have it written down, it always sticks with me. We don't really have to work so hard. We don't have to suffer and push the providence forward and go out witnessing. Because if we all just move to one state in the US, probably Wyoming has the least density, and then eventually the kingdom of heaven would come about, right? And it always inspired me because I always felt like Father was saying, there's always a plan B, guys, right? We can try really hard. We want to speed up the providence. We want to end God's suffering as fast as possible, right? If we have that heart of children who are trying to solve the heart of their parents, that will motivate us to really always do our best, always work the hardest. But in one sense, we've already won, right? That's how I interpret that message from Father, right? And also Father who declared the error after the coming of heaven, right? And it's so hard to accept that. It's always been very hard for me to accept that because there's still wars, there's still suffering. There's people I know personally whose lives are miserable and who can't, who have no connection to God, have no clear understanding or direction, right? So it's very hard for me to have this idea in my head that it's the error after the coming of heaven, right? It just sounds almost naive, almost too optimistic, right? But again, I think Father's saying the same thing in that God's already won, right? The providence is already moving forward. There might be kind of ups and downs and dips and tensions, but the principle's conclusion is always the same, right? And people ask me like, what's my favorite part of the principle? And I always say predestination, right? Because the conclusion of predestination is the only thing that's predestined is that God wins, right? That at the end of the day, no matter what happens, no matter how difficult life gets, no matter how much persecution or conflict comes our way, because all people are children of God, because all people have the seed of God in the original mind, then eventually the kingdom of God will come, right? The kingdom of heaven will come. And that message, that kind of, let's say, eternal optimism always gives me so much strength, right? So when these kind of challenges come in my personal life on kind of the church level, it's like a pillar for me, right? That, okay, we might have to struggle a bit. We might have to go back a few steps, but we will figure it out, right? Because God is real, then eventually we'll get there, right? And even if I just look back at the last 100 years, 200 years, I feel like the evidence is so strong that not just us, not just the movement, not just the church, but everybody is figuring out how to get closer to God. Everyone is figuring out how to be better people. And that doesn't mean people aren't confused. It doesn't mean there aren't wars. It doesn't mean there isn't a battle that we have to fight to succeed. But it does mean in aggregate, we're always moving kind of closer to God. And, we always have the backup plan of going to one state or one country, maybe one island, right? And then, really building God's kingdom now. So, again, actually, even though there's a lot of like frustration and anger, and for me, a lot of, yeah, I guess frustration is the best word. Like, people are so dumb is kind of how I keep telling myself, right? Politics is so dumb, right? And it it's so frustrating. But at the same time, mother's heart is the heart of the principle, right? Like, don't worry about me. Like, focus on building your communities, focus on taking care of each other, focus on loving each other. That's what converted me into the movement, was Father's heart in Hungnam of, don't worry about me, God. I might die here, but that's okay. Like, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of living as a real person, as a God-centered person, as a son of God. So the truth is, I don't think mother's afraid of death. Uh, I think it'd be crazy if she was. And also, ideally she should pass in the palace surrounded by her grandchildren and, a smooth transition of leadership. But, um, you know, mother is always going to be who she is. She's always going to follow the principle. She's not going to change because of what's happened. And I think she's proven that in the things she said and the way she's handling the situation. And I think that to me, it gives us a lot of confirmation of who we are as a community and who we need to be as blessed families and um, as followers of the guidance. So I just want to conclude kind of all these somewhat rambling thoughts into 3 points. And the first point, which I really believe in, I really genuinely like is a part of how I try to live my everyday life, is the best thing to always do is to move forward, right? To move forward with what we believe is right and that we've already won, right? True parents have already won. So everything we do on top of that is trying to speed up, right? To end human suffering faster. And so again, I'm almost I don't want to say inspired because it's the wrong word, but I'm ready, let's say. I'm ready to keep moving forward, and I'm very grateful that um, this kind of attack on mother and our movement shouldn't really phase us. I feel like I've been taught the principle in a way where it doesn't phase me, right? I'm excited almost to still be who I am, still follow the principle. That proves time and time again that it's the right path, right? Um, and that kind of leads into my second point is really no matter what happens to us, I don't know, maybe we'll get raided in 5 years for whatever reason, right? And maybe I have to go to jail. And even if that happens, um, I feel like we should never compromise the principle, right? The message is always forgive, love, unite. The answer is always Jacob's course, voluntary submission of people who hate us, right? And that's what, again, I've been very um, proud to see kind of Shin Chunim's maturing heart and him really like publicly trying his best to not have any resentment, to really forgive everyone, right? To really be like the principal way is always, you know, to see everyone as a son or daughter of God. And the last point is I do think though, this is kind of a warning as well that we have to be ready for um, potentially getting attacked, right? So I kind of made that joke about getting arrested in 5 years, but I feel like, am I ready for it? Is kind of my question. And I hope it never happens. I never want the world to go back to the days where people are thrown into the lion's den, right? Or just for the fact of having a faith, we get arrested, we get attacked by mobs or whatever, right? But I guess the question is that's the foundation we stand on. So if we had to, could we do it? And how would we do it? Right? How would we behave? How would we react to that kind of more direct persecution? Um, so part of me feels like, all right, I have to be ready. I have to be ready for that attack, that kind of persecution, because it's close, right? An attack on mother is kind of attack on everybody. It's happening in Japan, right? The way politics are going in the US could easily happen in the US. It's kind of a disaster area over there right now. Like UK has anti-speech laws, criticize the government, on Twitter, get arrested. Like the world doesn't always move smoothly in the right direction, even though I believe that's the trend. So, you know, part of me is kind of thinking what is the principled way to kind of be part of a culture that suddenly becomes um, attached to it. I don't think it's shooting back. um, you know, I I still find that story fascinating. Um, but it is really the standard that true parents have always set forward, right? So um, so those were my thoughts today. I hope there's something that are somewhat helpful because I know everyone has to digest this kind of situation to the best of their ability. But grateful for everyone being here today. Grateful to see so many faces. I hope everyone can have a nice lunch together, spend some quality time together. And on that note, I will conclude with a prayer. Everyone can please join me. Prayer. 사랑의 많으신 하늘 부모님, our beloved and precious heavenly parents. As always, we're gathered here as brothers and sisters of our community and from visiting communities, but still part of our European and global community of brothers and sisters. And always, I feel so grateful that we have each other to share, to speak to support each other. We know right now that True Mother is being persecuted by the Korean government, being held alone at the detention center over the course of a Korean national holiday. So I pray for her health. I pray that she can be released soon, not even as much for her sake or our sake, really for the sake of the Korean people and the kind of um, where they stand in history according to God's promise. And really there's so much more we can do. I know every person here really does their best to do your will. They really strive to live according to their conscience and understand how to be the best person they can be. So I pray that these kind of situations and these circumstances can help us to reflect more deeply, to kind of open up our inner hearts and understand our own selves better and how we react and how we learn from what happens around us and what's happening to Mother at this time. I think very crucially, one of the key ways we can really honor true Mother and what she herself has said is to truly live according to the principles that we've been taught, to take care of each other as a community, to really uplift each other and understand each other, to pray together and to work together. I pray today, all of us, as we meet together after the service, can really lift each other up and as we speak to each other, truly listen to each other's hearts, and that the experience and the conversations and the time together can bring us closer to you as our origin, as the origin of love, as our loving parent. And I pray we can be aligned in heart to you and to our true parents, and that it can give us clarity, purpose, direction, and help us to really lead more happy, fulfilling lives. Again, I started this prayer in gratitude and I end it in gratitude. I have so much that I am so grateful for. I report this in the name of Young Il Lo, Blessed Central Family, in attendance to the Holy Mother.